I'm Leo. I'm 28 years old, and my parents spent my entire life telling me they were too broke to celebrate my achievements, only to turn around and rent out entire ballrooms for my golden child brother. Before I tell you about the explosive fallout that changed our family forever, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Alright, let's get into it. The whole thing started with a single picture. 12 of them, actually. I was standing on the expansive cedar deck of my newly renovated lake house, the water sparkling behind me under a perfect, painted Michigan sunset. The house wasn't a sprawling mansion, but it was mine, and it was beautiful. Every single floorboard I had personally sanded, every wall I had painstakingly painted. It was a monument to years of silent work and quiet ambition. I'd hired a professional photographer, a talented woman named Sophia, to capture it all, and the images she sent back were breathtaking. They looked like something out of a magazine. My thumb hovered over the post button on my phone's screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat that seemed to echo in the quiet evening air. I had written and rewritten the caption at least 20 times. I typed out long, angry paragraphs, then deleted them. I tried being witty, then deleted that too. In the end, I settled on something simple, sharp, and surgically precise. Thanks for the motivation. Sometimes being overlooked is the best thing that can happen to you. I pressed the button. The upload was instantaneous. For a brief, beautiful moment, there was nothing but the sound of the crickets and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. Then my phone buzzed. A like from my friend Liam. Another from Ava. Comments started to flood in, a tidal wave of digital validation from friends, old college buddies, and colleagues. Leo, this is absolutely insane. Congratulations. Dude, you bought a lake house. That's incredible. That view is worth $1 million. So proud of you, man. Felt good. Incredibly good. It was a warmth spreading through my chest, a feeling of tangible accomplishment that was, for the first time, completely and utterly mine. Then, another buzz vibrated through the phone. A different kind of notification. A text message. The name on the screen made my stomach instantly clench into a tight, cold knot. Ethan. My older brother. The message was predictably short, dripping with a casual condescension he had perfected over the years. Nice house. Congrats. But what do you mean, thanks for the motivation? Seems a little passive-aggressive. I stared at the screen, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my lips. A little passive-aggressive? Oh, we were so far beyond that. We were in a different galaxy of passive aggression. Before I could even begin to formulate a reply, my phone erupted into a frantic ringing. The caller ID flashed a name that made the knot in my stomach tighten even further. Mom! I knew this was coming. This was the inevitable second wave. I took a deep, steadying breath, squared my shoulders as if preparing for a physical blow, and answered the call. Leo? Her voice was clipped, strained. A violin string pulled too tight. There was no, hello. No congratulations on this incredible achievement. Just the immediate, accusatory tone that had been the background music of my entire life. What is the meaning of that post on your Instagram? It's just a picture of my new house, Mom, I said, my voice a mask of calm that I did not feel. Don't you dare play dumb with me, Leo, she snapped. Thanks for the motivation. What is that supposed to mean? Are you trying to embarrass us? After everything we have done for you, everything you've done for me? The question hung there in the charged silence, so profoundly absurd that it almost made me laugh again. But I didn't say it. I didn't have to. Because this moment, this explosive confrontation, wasn't born from a single Instagram post. It was the catastrophic failure of a dam that had been cracking under the pressure of a lifetime of resentment. And the very first crack, the one that had started it all, had appeared just a few months earlier, when I overheard a single, devastating phone call that I was never, ever supposed to hear. To truly understand why a handful of pictures could detonate a 28-year-old family dynamic, you have to understand my childhood. We lived in a leafy, perfectly average middle-class suburb just outside Boston. My dad, Robert, was a CPA, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and bottom lines. My mom, Helen, was an elementary school teacher, a woman who, ironically, preached fairness and equality to her students all day. From the outside, we were the quintessential American family. But inside the meticulously maintained walls of our colonial-style house, there were two separate, unequal kingdoms. There was Ethan's kingdom, bathed in sunlight and applause. And then there was my territory, a quiet, shadowy corner. The border between these two worlds was never more clearly defined than on our birthdays. I remember my 7th birthday with a cinematic clarity. 4 of my friends, the ones from my street, came over. We sat on the living room floor and watched The Lion King on VHS. Afterwards, my mom brought out a rectangular sheet cake from the local Stop and Shop, the frosting a sickly sweet, electric blue. It was fine. I blew out the 7 candles, made a wish, and didn't know enough to want anything more. That was in June. Then came September and Ethan's 10th birthday. It was a different universe. Our backyard was transformed into a miniature carnival. My dad had rented a professional-grade bouncy castle, a monstrous, vibrant dragon that took up half the lawn, a professional clown, whose painted smile seemed more menacing than cheerful, was making balloon animals. And the cake wasn't a sheet cake. It was a 3-tiered masterpiece from a fancy bakery, adorned with a handcrafted sugar sculpture of Ethan's favorite superhero. At least 30 kids were running rampant, their screams of delight echoing through the neighborhood. My parents were in their element, weaving through the chaos, their faces beaming with a kind of incandescent pride I had never seen directed at me. I remember tugging on the hem of my mom's floral dress, feeling small and bewildered by the sheer scale of the event. "Why is Ethan's party so big?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the joyful noise. She knelt down, her smile faltering for just a second as it met my questioning eyes. "Well, sweetie, Ethan is a bit older, you know, and his friends. There are just so many of them. Besides," she added, her voice dropping conspiratorially, we have to be a little more careful with money this year. Your father's job has been stressful and we have to think about the college fund and all of that. We have to save for the really important things." The important things. I was 7 years old, but the implication was crystal clear. I wasn't one of them. That phrase, the important things, became the ghost in our house, a constant, invisible justification for the disparity. It was the reason I couldn't join the travel soccer team. The fees were too high, while Ethan's hockey bag was filled with brand new, top-of-the-line equipment every season. It was the reason my school art projects were completed with budget-brand crayons and construction paper, while Ethan received a shiny new Easton baseball bat every spring. It was a mantra of scarcity that only ever applied to me. The inequality wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was about the currency of attention. The year Ethan's Little League team won the regional championship, the entire family, including aunts, uncles, and cousins, went out to a fancy Italian restaurant to celebrate. Photos were taken. His trophy was passed around the table like a holy relic, and it was later given a place of honor in the center of the big glass display cabinet in our living room. My dad gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion, about Ethan's dedication and talent. A year later, I won first place in a district-wide art competition. It was a big deal, at least to me. My piece, a detailed charcoal drawing of our aging golden retriever, was chosen out of hundreds of submissions from a dozen different schools. I came home from school that day clutching a large blue ribbon and a framed certificate, my chest so puffed out with pride I felt like I might float away. I found my dad in his armchair, reading the Boston Globe. "Dad, look, I won." He glanced up, peering over his reading glasses. "Oh, that's nice, son. Good job." He then promptly returned to the sports section. My mom was a little more enthusiastic. She gave me a hug and tacked the ribbon to the crowded corkboard in the kitchen, right next to the grocery list and a coupon for 50 cents off laundry detergent. It stayed there for about a week before being obscured by school lunch menus and a flyer for a local car wash. There was no celebratory dinner. There were no proud phone calls to relatives. My achievement was simply nice. It wasn't important enough to disrupt the family's routine. It wasn't trophy cabinet worthy. Ethan's world was a stadium of applause, of public validation and celebration. Mine was a quiet library of nods and dismissals. He was the son they could brag about at neighborhood barbecues. His athletic prowess was visible, easily quantifiable in trophies and wins. My quiet, introspective talent for drawing was an enigma to them, a hobby that didn't fit into the simple, triumphant narrative they were trying to build for our family. And that pattern, etched into the foundation of our home in those early years, would only deepen and harden over time, creating a chasm between us that would eventually become impossible to cross. They were saving for the important things. And with each passing year, it became painfully, undeniably clear that I was not on that list. The pattern of dismissal went from a subtle, painful undercurrent to a concrete, unavoidable reality the year I turned 10. For months, I'd been eagerly anticipating my birthday. I didn't want a bouncy castle or a clown. My ambitions were far more modest. I just wanted to take my 5 best friends to the local bowling alley, Cosmic Bowling, for a few games and some pizza. It was all I talked about, a small beacon of hope in my otherwise unremarkable social life. 2 weeks before the planned party, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. It was the same spot where I did my homework, the same spot where we ate dinner every night. But on this evening, it felt like a courtroom. The look on their faces, a carefully crafted blend of sympathy and sternness, told me everything before a word was spoken. "Leo," my dad started, his eyes fixed on the salt shaker in the middle of the table. "We've had some unexpected expenses come up. The car needed new brakes, and the water heater started leaking. It's just not a good time for a big party." "A big party?" I asked, my voice small. "It was just bowling." "Well, even that adds up," my mom interjected quickly, her hand patting my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt dismissive. "We'll do something small, just the family. We'll get a cake. It'll be lovely." The something small was exactly that. A single cake after a dinner of leftover meatloaf on a Tuesday night. The unexpected expenses were, of course, just another convenient fiction. The real reason for the cancellation became glaringly apparent 6 months later when my brother Ethan turned 13. For his official entry into the teenage years, my parents threw him a massive party at a rented-out event space. There was a DJ, a dance floor, 60 of his closest friends, and a professional photographer documenting every moment. Apparently, the family finances had made a miraculous and very specific recovery. It was around then that I stopped trying to find a place in their world and started carving out my own. If recognition was a resource as scarce as they claimed, I would have to find it elsewhere. I joined the high school debate team, not because I was particularly passionate about politics, but because I discovered I was good at it. I had a knack for constructing arguments, for dismantling flawed logic, for speaking with a confidence that I didn't feel in any other area of my life. My coach, Mr. Davies, a sharp, sardonic history teacher with a booming voice, was the first adult outside my family who looked at me and didn't seem to see a shadow. He saw a mind at work. After I won my first solo tournament, dismantling my opponent's argument on economic policy, he pulled me aside. "You have a genuine gift for persuasion, Leo," he told me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Most kids just regurgitate talking points. You think. The way your mind constructs these arguments, that's a real intellectual talent. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Hearing those words felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. It was a form of validation so pure and unconditional that it was almost overwhelming. It was a lifeline. It was in my AP English class that I met Chloe. She was brilliant, fiercely cynical, and had a built-in radar for hypocrisy that I both feared and admired. She saw right through people, and she saw right through my family situation after hearing only a few of my frustrated anecdotes. One day, after I told her about my parents' latest excuse for why they couldn't help me pay for a school trip to Washington, D.C., she just looked at me, completely unimpressed. "You know it's not about the money, right?" she said, not unkindly, just stating a fact. "They always manage to find money for Ethan. Your mom was just telling my mom about the expensive summer sports camp he's going to. But they couldn't spare $200 for your trip." I mumbled something defensive, a line I'd heard 1,000 times at home. Well, the camp is an investment in his future. He might get a scholarship. Chloe shook her head, a small, sad smile on her face. No, it's not about budgets, Leo. It's not about investments. It's about priorities. It's a resource allocation problem. And you're just not a priority. Her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me because of their brutal, unvarnished truth. It was a truth I'd been subconsciously aware of for years, a truth I'd been diligently making excuses for them and for myself. To hear it spoken so plainly, so unapologetically, by someone on the outside was both devastating and strangely liberating. It was the moment the fog of childhood hope began to clear. I stopped waiting for them to change. I stopped believing their narrative of financial hardship. I realized that if I wanted to have my accomplishments celebrated, my existence acknowledged, I would have to be the one to build the stage and turn on the spotlight. But I had no idea just how deep that prioritization ran, or how much it would cost me when it came to the truly big moments that were yet to come. It wasn't just about birthday parties anymore. It was about my entire future. The final years of high school put our family's bizarre economy of affection under a harsh, fluorescent light, and the imbalance was starker than ever. Ethan's graduation was treated like a royal wedding. My parents, citing the importance of this once-in-a-lifetime milestone, rented a private ballroom at the downtown Hilton. The guest list exceeded 100 people. There was a fully catered dinner, an open bar for the adults, and even a small string quartet playing in the corner. My dad, standing at a podium, gave a 10-minute, tearful speech about his immense pride in his son. The athlete, the leader, the future success story. The whole affair cost them over $5,000. A figure I overheard my mom whisper to my aunt with a strange mixture of complaint and pride. 2 years later, my own graduation approached. I was graduating with high honors, a member of the National Honor Society, and with several academic awards to my name. I knew better than to expect a ballroom, but a small part of me held out hope for some kind of genuine celebration. I made the mistake of asking my mom what the plan was. She was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, and she didn't even turn around. Well, honey, you know your brother is. He's always been more of a social butterfly. He has so many friends. You've always been more of an introvert. It wouldn't make sense to have a big party. An introvert. That was the new justification. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about my personality. My quiet nature was now a convenient excuse for their lack of effort. It implied that I wouldn't want a party, that I would be uncomfortable with the attention. It was a masterful piece of emotional manipulation. "We'll do something nice, of course," she added, finally turning to me with a tight, practiced smile. "A family dinner at that steakhouse you like. It'll be lovely." The real chasm, however, opened up during the college application process. For Ethan, my parents had spared no expense. They hired a private admissions counselor for $1,000 an hour to polish his essays and perfect his applications. They paid for him to tour 6 different universities up and down the East Coast, turning the trips into mini vacations. When he got into his first-choice state school, they threw another massive party, celebrating as if he'd been accepted to Harvard. I, on the other hand, was left to navigate the labyrinthine process on my own. I spent countless hours in the school library, poring over heavy course catalogs, writing and rewriting my essays, and trying to make sense of the FAFSA and other financial aid forms. My dream school was Northwestern, a top-tier university in Chicago, known for its strong economics and communications programs. I applied, thinking of it as a lottery ticket, a wild, improbable long shot. The day the acceptance letter arrived, it felt like a miracle. A thick envelope, not a thin one. I tore it open, my hands shaking. Not only had I gotten in, but they were offering me a $20,000 academic merit scholarship. Couldn't believe it. I had done it all on my own. I ran into the living room, waving the letter like a flag of victory. I got in. I got into Northwestern, and I got a $20,000 scholarship. My dad took the letter from my hand, his brow furrowing as he read it. The first words out of his mouth were not "congratulations" or "I'm so proud of you." The first words were, 20,000? That's great, son. But Northwestern's tuition is over 60,000 a year. How are we supposed to pay for the rest of that? That's a lot of money, Leo. That's a serious financial burden. There it was again. My single greatest academic achievement, the key to a future I had worked tirelessly to build, wasn't a triumph in their eyes. It was a financial problem. It was an inconvenience. My mom chimed in, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle concern that was more cutting than any criticism. Maybe you should consider one of the state schools, dear. Like Ethan. It would be so much more sensible. We wouldn't have to worry about taking out so many loans. That was it. That was the moment something inside me, something that had been slowly cracking for years, finally shattered. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't try to defend my dream. I just reached out, took the letter back from my dad's hand, and walked to my room, a cold, hard resolve settling deep in my bones. I felt an almost chilling sense of calm. The fight was over. I had lost. Or maybe I had finally been set free. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out my closet, getting ready to pack for college. I had decided to accept the offer, loans and all. I would figure it out on my own. Tucked away in the back, under a pile of old sweaters, I found an old cardboard box. It was heavy. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside, I found dozens of my old drawings, my art competition ribbons, essays with A+ grades, even the little trophy from a third-grade spelling bee I'd completely forgotten about. My mom had saved them all. For a fleeting, foolish second, I felt a flicker of hope, a pang of love. She did care. She did see me. But I was in a rush that day, so eager to leave that house and that life behind, that I just pushed the box back into the closet and forgot about it. That was a mistake. Critical one. I should have looked closer. I should have examined the evidence. As I got on the bus to Chicago a few months later with 2 suitcases and the scholarship money I'd earned, there was no emotional, movie-style farewell. Just a quick, awkward hug from my mom and a handshake from my dad. In their minds, I was going off to pursue an expensive, impractical, and frankly selfish dream. But I knew the truth. I was escaping a prison of low expectations. And I swore to myself, as the Boston skyline shrank in the rearview window, that I was never, ever going to ask them for anything again. Chicago was a baptism by ice and wind. It was loud, sprawling, and completely indifferent to my existence. And I had never felt more at home. For the first time in my life, I was just Leo. Not Ethan's little brother. Not the quiet, introverted one. I was a blank slate, and the feeling of anonymity was the most profound and exhilarating freedom I had ever known. Northwestern was as demanding as its reputation suggested, but I thrived on the pressure. The academic rigor was a challenge I could meet head-on, a quantifiable system where effort and intelligence were rewarded, regardless of your personality. I kept my scholarship by maintaining a 3.9 GPA, and I worked 2, sometimes 3, part-time jobs to cover my rent, books, and living expenses. I was a shelver at the university library, a barista at a campus coffee shop, and a waiter at a Greasy Spoon diner on weekends. I was perpetually exhausted, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination, but it was a deeply satisfying kind of tired. Every dollar I earned was my own. Every A on a paper was my own. Every small success was a brick I was laying in the foundation of a life that belonged solely to me. My calls home became less frequent, shrinking from a weekly obligation to a perfunctory check-in every few months. The conversations were always the same, following a predictable and painful script. I'd ask how they were, and they'd give me a brief, generic update before launching into a 20-minute, highly detailed monologue about Ethan's latest triumphs. Ethan had made the dean's list. Ethan was the star quarterback of his intramural football team. Ethan had a new, beautiful girlfriend whose father was a successful lawyer. I'd listen, my phone pressed to my ear, and murmur, "That's great," at the appropriate intervals before making an excuse about having to study for an exam. They rarely asked about my classes, my jobs, or my life in Chicago. It was as if my existence had become a faded photograph, while Ethan's was a high-definition, blockbuster movie they were watching on a loop. It was easier for everyone that way. The real seismic shift in my life happened during my first Thanksgiving break. The cost of a round-trip flight back to Boston was more than I could afford, a luxury that would have wiped out a month's worth of earnings. When I called to tell my parents I wasn't coming home, there was a brief, telling pause on the line. Then my mom said, in a voice tinged with something that sounded unervingly like relief, "Oh, well, that's probably for the best. It'll save us some money on groceries." I hung up the phone, the familiar ache of disappointment blooming in my chest. I sat on my dorm room bed, staring at the gray Chicago sky, feeling profoundly alone. But a few hours later, my roommate, Sam, a kind, boisterous guy from a big family in rural Illinois, found me. "My parents are insisting you come home with me for Thanksgiving," he announced, tossing a football from one hand to the other. "My mom will absolutely not take no for an answer. She's already planned an extra place setting and is threatening to make you your own personal pie." I tried to refuse, embarrassed and not wanting to impose, but the Millers were a force of nature. That week with them was a revelation, a culture shock of the most wonderful kind. Their house was loud, chaotic, and filled with a warmth that seemed to radiate from the very walls. They were endlessly curious about me. Mr. Miller, a farmer with hands like leather, wanted to hear all about my economics classes, arguing good-naturedly with me about fiscal policy. Mrs. Miller, a woman with a laugh that could shake the house, asked about my job at the diner and made me not one, but two of my favorite pies after finding out what it was. They included me in their fiercely competitive family board games, dragged me out for their traditional freezing-cold touch football game on Thanksgiving morning, and argued over who got to give me the best leftovers to take back to my dorm. When it was time for me to go back to school, they all hugged me like I was one of their own. It was a genuine, unconditional affection that had nothing to do with what I could achieve, what I could offer them, or how I would make them look to the outside world. They simply liked me for who I was. Their casual generosity felt more like family than anything I had ever known. To them, my presence wasn't a burden. It was a bonus. I spent every subsequent holiday, Thanksgivings, Christmases, Easters, with the Millers. They became my surrogate family. They celebrated my good grades, offered sound advice when I was stressed about my future, and when I graduated from Northwestern, they drove 6 hours in their packed minivan to be there. They screamed my name when I walked across the stage, their cheers louder and more enthusiastic than anyone else's in that vast auditorium. My own parents, citing the expense of the trip, sent a congratulatory card with a $50 check tucked inside. Being with the Millers wasn't just comforting. It was educational. It showed me what real, unconditional support looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive parties. It was about showing up. It was about asking questions and actually listening to the answers. It solidified my resolve. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore because I had found something better. I was building my own life, my own support system, my own definition of family. And soon, I would start building my own career, proving my worth in a world where results, not last names, were what mattered. I was ready to show everyone, especially myself, what I was capable of. After graduation, armed with a prestigious degree and a mountain of student loan debt, I dove headfirst into the corporate world of Chicago. I landed an internship at a fast-growing digital marketing firm called Pulse Digital. It was exactly the kind of environment I'd been searching for, a pure, unadulterated meritocracy. Nobody cared who your family was, where you went to high school, or if you were a social butterfly. The only thing that mattered was the quality of your work, the data you could drive, and the results you could deliver. And I worked like my life depended on it. In many ways, it did. I was the first one in the office every morning and the last one to shut down my computer every night. I volunteered for the most difficult projects, the ones with demanding clients and impossible deadlines that everyone else avoided. I spent my weekends reading marketing journals and taking online courses to sharpen my skills. I wasn't just trying to succeed. I was trying to build an indestructible fortress of competence around myself, a fortress so well constructed that no one could ever dismiss my value again. My relentless efforts did not go unnoticed. My boss, a sharp, incredibly driven man named David Chun, saw the hunger in me. He was a demanding but fair leader who had built his department from the ground up. He respected grit and intelligence above all else. He started giving me more responsibility, pulling me into high-stakes client meetings, and trusting me with bigger accounts. He became more than a boss. He was a mentor, someone whose approval I actually valued because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it had to be earned. "Leo, your work ethic is off the charts," he told me during a performance review one afternoon. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an appraising look. "A lot of people work hard, but it's your strategic thinking that sets you apart. You don't just see the next move. You see the whole board, 3 moves ahead. That's a rare talent." Coming from him, that piece of praise was worth more than 1,000 hollow good jobs from my father. It was specific. It was earned. It was real. My career took off like a rocket. I was hired full-time after my internship, then promoted to a team lead within 2 years. I was good at my job, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of pride that wasn't tinged with the need for anyone else's validation. I was financially independent. I paid off a huge chunk of my student loans. I had a great circle of friends, a life I had meticulously built from scratch. The pinnacle, the moment that felt like a summit after a long, arduous climb, came when I was 26. David Chun called me into his office, the big one in the corner with the panoramic view of the city. He closed the door, a rare and slightly ominous gesture. "Leo," he said, getting straight to the point in his typical fashion. "Sarah is leaving the company. She's moving to the West Coast. That means her position is open." Sarah was my direct manager, the director of marketing. My heart started to beat a little faster. "I've already spoken with the partners," David continued. "We all agree. The job is yours if you want it. It's a huge promotion, a significant leap in responsibility." He slid a piece of paper across his desk. "And it comes with a salary that reflects that. We believe you're ready." I looked down at the paper. The number written on it made me feel lightheaded. It was more than my father made. It would more than double what I was currently earning. I was stunned into silence. It was a massive leap of faith on their part, a testament to the years of trust one had built. "Ah, yes," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you, David." That evening, I sat alone in my small but comfortable apartment, a glass of expensive whiskey, a celebratory gift to myself, in my hand. I stared out at the glittering Chicago skyline and felt a familiar, foolish, and stubbornly persistent urge. I wanted to tell my parents. A small, irrational part of me, a part that I just couldn't seem to kill, still craved their validation. I thought, this is it. This is the one. This is the achievement they can't possibly downplay or ignore. It's a fancy title. It's a lot of money. It's a success story even they can understand. So, with a sense of hopeful trepidation that I should have known better than to feel, I picked up the phone and dialed their number. This time I thought it would finally be different. This time they would finally see me. "Mom? It's Leo." "Leo. Hi, honey. How are you doing?" Her voice was cheerful but distracted. I could hear the muffled sounds of a TV game show in the background. "I'm good, Mom. I'm great. I have some incredible news." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking with the adrenaline that was still coursing through my veins. "David, my boss, he just promoted me. I'm the new director of marketing for the entire company." There was a beat of silence on the line. I could hear the distant sound of the game show's applause track. "Oh, director, that's wonderful, dear. That's a big title. We're so proud of you." It was the tone she used when a neighbor's kid made the honor roll. It was polite, appropriate, and completely devoid of any genuine excitement. There were no follow-up questions about my new role, no curiosity about the increase in my salary, no exclamation of surprise. Before I could even process the lukewarm, almost rehearsed response, she pivoted with breathtaking speed. "Speaking of news," she said, her voice suddenly animated, infused with a vibrant, authentic excitement that had been completely absent just a second before. "You will never guess what happened. Ethan and Jessica are engaged. He proposed last night down by the harbor. It was the most romantic thing you've ever seen. He bought her the most beautiful ring. A real diamond. It's just stunning. We are all just absolutely over the moon. And just like that, in the space of a single sentence, I was rendered invisible again. My career-defining achievement, the culmination of 8 years of relentless work and sacrifice, was instantly demoted to a brief, uninteresting opening act for the main event, Ethan's life. The air went out of my lungs in a silent whoosh. The pride and joy I'd felt just moments before curdled into a familiar, bitter resignation. It was a feeling I knew as well as my own name. "Wow," I managed to say, my voice flat and empty. That's great. Tell him congratulations for me." "Of course I will. We're already starting to think about the wedding plans. It's going to have to be a huge affair, you know how many friends they have. We have to find the perfect venue. Something really special. And those places book up so fast." I tuned her out. I just stood there, my glass of celebratory whiskey forgotten in my hand, and stared out my apartment window at the indifferent lights of the Chicago skyline. She went on for another 10 minutes, a breathless monologue about Jessica's family, the stunning clarity of the diamond, the potential wedding dates, the challenge of creating a guest list. I just made non-committal sounds of agreement every 30 seconds or so, my mind a million miles away. Nothing had changed. Nothing was ever going to change. It didn't matter if I became the CEO of my company or found a cure for cancer. In their eyes, I would always be the supporting actor, the B-plot in the blockbuster movie of my brother's life. When I finally managed to get off the phone, I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind a cold, desolate emptiness. And in that void, a hard, clear decision took root. I was done. I was done seeking their approval. I was done hoping for a crumb of recognition from their table. I was done playing this unwinnable game. I decided in that moment that I would go home for my 28th birthday in a few months. But it wouldn't be a trip to beg for attention or to hope for a different outcome. It would be a final reconnaissance mission. It would be a way to look at the unvarnished reality of my family one last time with clear, unclouded, and unforgiving eyes before I closed that chapter for good. I needed to see it, to feel that dismissal in person one last time, to burn away that final, stupid, stubborn flicker of hope. I had to so I could finally, truly be free. My 28th birthday visit began with the crushing weight of predictability. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, having taken the day off work. I let myself into the house, and the scene was so familiar it was like a stage play I'd seen 100 times. My dad was in his armchair, engrossed in a golf tournament on TV. My mom was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice a whirlwind of cheerful excitement as she talked to one of her friends, undoubtedly about the wedding. They both gave me a quick, perfunctory hug, pointed me towards my old childhood bedroom, and then immediately returned to their separate orbits. The next day, the entire house buzzed with a single topic, Ethan's wedding. My mom had spreadsheets, binders, and magazine clippings spread across the dining room table. She was in her element, a general commanding a complex military operation. "Just trying to sort out some of these venue details," she said breezily when she saw me watching from the doorway, sipping a cup of coffee. "It's so incredibly stressful. Everything gets booked up a full year in advance. We have to make a decision soon." I just nodded, taking another sip. I had no intention of offering an opinion or getting involved. This was her world, her project. I was just a visitor. Later that afternoon, I was looking for a book to read in the living room when my eyes landed on a glossy, high-end brochure sitting on the coffee table. The cover featured a stunning photograph of a beautiful, rustic manor set against a backdrop of a sparkling lake and rolling hills. The name on the front, printed in elegant gold script, sent an electric jolt through me. Lakeview Manor. My breath caught in my throat. My mind flashed back a decade. I was 16, flipping through a bridal magazine for a school project on marketing. I had stumbled upon an ad for that exact venue. I'd been captivated by it. I had torn the page out and shown it to my mom. "If I ever get married," I'd said with the casual melodrama of a teenager, "I want it to be here." Isn't it perfect? She had smiled, glanced at it, and agreed that it was beautiful before changing the subject. And now here it was, the centerpiece of their plans for Ethan's wedding. My dream, a forgotten, offhand comment from my youth, had been plucked from my history and repurposed for my brother, likely without a single thought or memory of where they'd first heard the name. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a profound and intimate violation. It was the ultimate proof that my dreams, my hopes, my very identity, were just a communal resource pool they could draw from for the son who really mattered. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to get out of the house. I was putting on my shoes to go for a long, aimless walk when I heard my dad's voice drifting from his home office, the door slightly ajar. He was on the phone. His voice, usually so measured and calm, was booming with pride. "Yeah, we locked it in this morning. Lakeview Manor. It's costing an absolute fortune, but you only get to see your firstborn get married once. Right?" I froze, my hand on the front doorknob, my entire body rigid. He let out a hearty laugh. "The initial deposit alone was $20,000. Yeah, you heard me right. 20 grand. And that's just to hold the date. But what can you do? As I've always said, we've always made it a point to prioritize the things that are most important to our family." $20,000. The number reverberated in my skull. A deafening, echoing roar. $20,000. For a deposit. My mind became a chaotic slideshow of past humiliations. The cheap supermarket sheet cake because they needed to be careful with money. The canceled bowling party because of unexpected expenses. The agonizing lectures about financial prudence when I won a scholarship to my dream school. The constant, endless refrain about saving for the college fund, for the important things. It was all a lie, a massive, elaborate, lifelong lie. It was never about the money. It was never about being careful or sensible or prudent. It was about choice. They had the money. They always had the money. They just chose, consciously and repeatedly over and over again, never to spend it on me. That was the drop that didn't just spill the cup. It shattered the cup, the table, and the entire foundation of our family. I turned around, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked silently out the front door. I got in my car and started the 4-hour drive back to Chicago. I didn't say goodbye. They probably wouldn't even notice I was gone for hours. The quiet, weary resignation I'd carried for so many years was gone, incinerated in a flash of pure, white-hot rage. And in that fire, a new, audacious plan was forged. If they could spend a fortune on a single day for my brother, I would spend a fortune on a lifetime for myself. And I would make sure they saw it. The 4-hour drive back to Chicago was a blur of highway lights and pure, unadulterated fury. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, the cheap plastic of my sensible sedan groaning under the pressure. I replayed my father's words in my head on a loop, each repetition another turn of the knife. Prioritize the things that are most important. By the time I walked through the door of my apartment, the raw, explosive anger had cooled, crystallizing into something much colder, much harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Purpose. The very next morning, a Saturday, I was on the phone with Mrs. Evelyn Reed. She was a sharp, no-nonsense financial advisor in her late 60s, a woman my boss had recommended, describing her as a bulldog who will make your money work for you. I laid out my entire financial situation for her with the dispassionate clarity of an accountant. My savings, my investment portfolio, my new, substantial salary. "I want to buy a house," I told her, my voice completely firm, betraying none of the emotional turmoil of the last 24 hours. "A lake house." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a significant investment, Leo," she said, her voice pragmatic. "It's a major lifestyle change and a drain on liquid assets. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, and she could hear the conviction in my voice. For the next few weeks, I became a man possessed. I spent every spare moment, my lunch breaks, my evenings, my weekends, scrolling through real estate listings in Southwest Michigan, just a few hours' drive from Chicago. I wanted something I could afford without a monstrous mortgage, something with potential. And then I found it, a foreclosure. A run-down, utterly neglected house on the edge of a beautiful, clear body of water called Silver Lake. The online pictures were grim. Peeling paint, an overgrown yard that was more of a jungle, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. But it had good bones, a solid foundation, and $1 million view. It was perfect. It was a project. It was a perfect metaphor for me. Overlooked, undervalued, but with immense potential waiting to be uncovered. Before putting in an offer, I knew I had to go back to my parents' house one last time. It felt like a necessary, final act of severance. There were a few things from my childhood I wanted to retrieve. Some books, a couple of old photo albums. I drove down on a weekday knowing they'd be at work. I let myself in with my old key, the sound of the lock turning for the last time echoing in the silent house. The air was thick with memories I was now desperate to forget. I was in the dusty, damp-smelling basement, looking for my old things, when I saw it again. The old cardboard box from my closet, the one I'd found years ago before leaving for college. This time, I didn't push it aside. I carried it over to the single, bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, sat on the cold concrete floor, and lifted the lid. And this time, I looked closer. Inside were all my awards, just as I remembered. But underneath them were things I didn't. Sketchbooks filled with my childhood drawings. Notes from teachers praising my creativity and insight. And there, on the back of my first-place art ribbon from the district competition, tucked away where I would never have thought to look, was my mom's familiar, looping handwriting. It said, "So incredibly proud of my little artist. He has a real, true gift." My blood ran cold. Felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She knew. She had always known. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't that she didn't see my talent or understand its value. She saw it, she acknowledged it in secret, and then she consciously, deliberately chose to bury it. She chose to ignore it, to pretend it didn't matter, all while loudly and publicly celebrating every minor, predictable achievement of my brothers. That was the real, unforgivable betrayal. It wasn't just favoritism. It was active suppression. It was a quiet, systematic campaign to keep me in my place. I slowly, carefully closed the box, a profound and chilling clarity washing over me. This house I was about to buy, it wasn't just a home. It was a declaration of independence. It was my response to a lifetime of being buried. I was about to build something so beautiful, so successful, so undeniably real, that they would have no choice but to see it. And I would make sure the whole world saw it with them. I bought the house. My offer of $420,000 was accepted. The process of securing the mortgage, even with my excellent credit and high salary, was a bureaucratic nightmare. But I pushed through it with a single-minded focus. The day I closed the deal and the keys were finally in my hand, I felt a dizzying, terrifying thrill that was worth more than any amount of money. I drove straight to the property, stood on the rotting, precarious porch, and looked out at the calm, silver water. For the first time in my 28 years on this planet, I felt like I was standing on my own ground. The next 6 months were a blur of controlled chaos, of sweat and sawdust. Every single weekend, without fail, I'd make the 3-hour drive from my clean, orderly Chicago apartment to the beautiful disaster that was my house in Michigan. My 2 closest friends from work, Liam and Ava, after deciding I was completely insane, became my volunteer renovation crew. They seemed to understand, without me ever having to say it, that this was more than just a real estate project for me. "Dude, this is a massive, soul-crushing undertaking," Liam had said, his voice echoing in the disastrous, empty kitchen on our first day. "Good," I'd replied, handing him a crowbar. My soul could use a little crushing and rebuilding. We became a ruthlessly efficient demolition team. We tore the place down to the studs, a cathartic act of destruction to pave the way for creation. We ripped out old, stained carpets that smelled of mildew and 100 forgotten sorrows. We knocked down walls, creating an open, airy space that flowed towards the massive windows overlooking the lake. I, a man whose professional life revolved around spreadsheets and data analysis, learned how to install drywall, how to lay tongue-and-groove hardwood floors, how to wire a light fixture without electrocuting myself. My hands, usually soft and accustomed to a keyboard, became calloused, scarred, and perpetually stained with paint. There were moments of sheer, soul-crushing frustration. A sudden plumbing leak that flooded the brand-new bathroom floor, forcing us to rip it all out and start again. A shipment of custom windows that arrived in the wrong size, setting us back 3 weeks. A raccoon that somehow got into the attic and wreaked havoc. But every single setback only hardened my resolve. It made the final victory feel that much more earned. Liam and Ava were my saviors. They never complained about the long drives or the back-breaking labor. They seemed to instinctively understand that this was a form of therapy for me. This was my exorcism. You know, Ava said one sweltering afternoon in July, as we sat on the porch drinking ice-cold beers, all of us covered head to toe in a fine layer of drywall dust. You're a different person out here. You seem lighter. She was right. With every wall I painted a bright, clean white. I felt like I was painting over a dark, suffocating memory. With every warped floorboard I tore out and replaced with something straight and true, I was smoothing out the warped parts of my own past. I wasn't just building a house. I was building a sanctuary, a place where the rules were mine, where value was determined by me and me alone. I poured my new, substantial salary into the project. I hired the best local professionals for the things we couldn't do, the complex electrical work, the new roof, the intricate plumbing. I agonized over every single detail. I chose every fixture, every tile, every cabinet pull, every color. The kitchen got gleaming quartz countertops and professional-grade stainless steel appliances. The master bathroom got a huge, glass-enclosed walk-in shower with a rain head. I designed and built a massive, multi-level cedar deck that overlooked the lake, a space big enough to host all my friends, my real, chosen family. Finally, after 6 months of relentless, 7-day-a-week work, it was done. The dilapidated, forgotten foreclosure had been resurrected. It was transformed into a modern, minimalist, beautiful home. It was bright, clean, and flooded with natural light. It was everything I had ever wanted but never allowed myself to dream of. Walking through the finished space for the first time, a profound sense of peace washed over me, a feeling I'd never known before. This house wasn't a response to my family anymore. It had transcended its vengeful origins and become something else entirely. It was a testament to my own resilience, my own vision. I had taken something broken, discarded, and forgotten, and I had made it beautiful. I called Sophia, the photographer. "I'm ready," I told her, my voice clear and steady. "I want you to capture what I've built." I wanted proof. I wanted a permanent record. I wanted to see my accomplishment through an artist's eye, a form of validation I had been denied my entire life. And I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly what I was going to do with the pictures. The day after I posted the pictures on Instagram, I was out on my new deck, enjoying a quiet morning coffee and the silence. The air was crisp, the lake was like glass, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my mind was calm. That peace was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on my long gravel driveway. A familiar-looking black SUV, a massive, ostentatious vehicle, came barreling towards the house far too fast. My stomach dropped like a stone. It was my parents' car, and sitting in the passenger seat, I could just make out the silhouette of my brother, Ethan. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They had driven 4 hours, unannounced and uninvited, with the clear intention of an ambush. I remained seated in my Adirondack chair, a deliberate act of defiance. I watched as they stormed out of the car and marched up the steps to the deck. My mom's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. My dad's was thunderous, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. Ethan trailed behind them, looking profoundly uncomfortable, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "What is the meaning of this, Leo?" my mom demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. She shoved her phone in my face. The Instagram post with its hundreds of likes and congratulatory comments displayed on the screen. "Are you trying to publicly shame us? Is that your goal?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee before answering, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. I'm sharing pictures of my new house, Mom. Isn't that what people do on social media? Don't you play these manipulative games with us? My dad boomed, his voice echoing across the quiet lake, startling a flock of geese into flight. That caption, "Thanks for the motivation. You're making us out to be monsters. After we worked so hard our entire lives to give you and your brother a good life." A good life. I finally set my mug down and stood up, my movements slow and controlled. My voice, when I spoke, was dangerously calm. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the good life. Let's talk about the birthday parties. Let's talk about the graduation celebrations. Let's talk about the fact that you are spending more on the deposit for Ethan's wedding than you ever invested in my entire childhood combined. They were stunned into silence for a second, clearly shocked that I was not just pushing back, but pushing back with specific, itemized receipts of their neglect. "That's not fair," my mom finally sputtered, finding her voice. "That's a terrible thing to say. Ethan just, he needed the support. He's more social. He has different needs." Different needs. I let out a laugh, a sharp, humorless sound that held no joy. "Or a different value in your portfolio. For years I actually believed you. I spent my entire childhood and adolescence believing your excuses about the college fund and the unexpected expenses. I actually felt guilty for wanting things, for having ambitions that might cost you money." I took a step closer, forcing them to meet my gaze. "But then I came home for my birthday, and I saw the brochure for Lakeview Manor on the coffee table. My dream venue, Mom. The one I tore out of a magazine and showed you a decade ago. And then I heard you on the phone, Dad, bragging about the $20,000 deposit like it was a badge of honor." My dad's face went pale. A flicker of something, shock, guilt, the panic of being caught, flashed in his eyes. "It was never about the money," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. But each word was laced with the cold, hard steel of certainty. "It was never even about loving Ethan more than me, not really. It was about your image." I let that word hang in the charged air between us. A final, damning indictment. Ethan fit the image you wanted to project to the world. The popular, successful athlete. The social butterfly with hundreds of friends. His successes were loud. They were visible. They were easy to brag about at dinner parties and in Christmas card letters. My successes were quiet. A drawing, a debate trophy, a scholarship. They didn't have the same curb appeal, did they? They didn't fit the brand. I looked directly at my mother, the memory of her secret note on the back of my ribbon burning in my mind. "You didn't just overlook me?" I said, the final, terrible truth pouring out of me. A poison that I had held inside for far too long. "You actively suppressed me. You saw my talents, you even acknowledged them in secret, and then you buried them. Because my quiet, inconvenient success was a threat to the simple, triumphant story you were telling about this family. The story of the perfect parents with the perfect, golden son." Silence. A complete, deafening, and absolute silence. There was nothing they could say. There was no excuse they could make. I had taken their carefully constructed family narrative, their life's work of public relations, and I had shattered it into a million pieces right at their feet, on the deck of the house that was proof of their failure. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the power, and I had no intention of ever giving it back.